Welcome to the first ever War is Stupid and Anti-War podcast about war holiday special. You'll note that, yes, it is October, or should I say Tishrei, because the holiday we're talking about is Yom Kippur. I'm honored to have Rabbi Andrue Kahn, the executive director of the American Council for Judaism. Welcome, Rabbi Kahn, or do you prefer Rabbi Andy?
You can just call me Rabbi Andy. You can even just call me Andy. You don't even have to throw the rabbi.
Oh, amazing. I grew up in conservative Judaism at a conservative shul, so it was very formal. It's rabbi's last name. So I like how reform is immediately chiller, that we're on a first name basis.
I don't know that I can speak for the entire movement in that
Yeah.
regard, but because I grew up Reform and my rabbi was Rabbi Rosenthal. Um, it may be a millennial thing. I may be just trying to be cool. I don't know.
You are cool. It's working. I'm really grateful and excited to have you. I am going to try my best not to make this a personal therapy session for me. I'll try to make it as applicable to everyone else as possible, but I am going into the holidays with an even greater sense of dread than usual. I want to talk about what are you going into this Day of Atonement thinking about and talking about?
So going into Yom Kippur this year, it's really tough. I don't think you're alone in feeling that way. I think, this is the second Yom Kippur since October 7th and since the, you know, kind of unbelievable and ongoing um, increase in the onslaught of Israel against Gaza and the West Bank. We're watching Palestinians in both places be killed, imprisoned, and ostensibly in the name of the Jewish state, which in many ways the state tries to implicate all Jews all over the world in this. Um, and I think many people do feel implicated, right? Like it makes sense. And going into Yom Kippur, the question really crops up for so many people. Um, what does it mean to be part of that collective? A thing that is really obvious in the Yom Kippur liturgy is that when you are publicly kind of asking for forgiveness in the liturgical mode, it's done collectively. It says, we have done X, we have done Y. And so it really pushes us to understand and think about and internalize what it means to be responsible for others, what our responsibilities are within the Jewish sphere and beyond. And I try to live my life in such a way that when Yom Kippur rolls around, I'm not too surprised by the things I feel guilty about. I try to, one of the main things in Judaism is this idea of tshuva, of reflecting and trying to do better all the time, of doing the hard work of noting where you've fallen short and doing repair and then making sure you don't do it again. And it gets highlighted on Yom Kippur, but it's something we're supposed to do year round. So I'm hoping there are no surprises as I slip into that truly deep reflective mode that comes with Yom Kippur. But I think there's always ways to be doing more and always ways to be trying to live more strongly in our greatest ethical stance. So that's what I'm carrying with me right now.
Yes, so there is textual basis for me. That's been one of the many disappointing things over the last 2 years is people don't see the irony in saying like, oh, you're Jewish, this means you got to shut up about this. Like of all the times, of all the things, now is the time you decide not to exercise your Jewish value and your Jewish commitment to kvetching. I'm grateful that there are rabbis like you who speak in terms of ethical stance. I Yeah, I go in with dread and anger, the fact that Ben-Gvir and Smotrich are ostensibly reading the same words as me and coming to the exact opposite conclusion. Jewishly, how do your Jewish values, your experience as a rabbi, inform your anti-war work? I should mention you're involved with Rabbis for Ceasefire. You spoke powerfully at the Yizkor here in Brooklyn at the Grand Army Plaza in Grand Army Plaza last year. So yeah, tell me about how your rabbinate informs your activism.
Yeah. I mean, entirely, right? Like what drew me to this line of work, like, was the prophets, was the words in Isaiah and Amos and Micah that are all focused on our responsibility to making this world a better place, starting with the people who are most at risk, most oppressed in our society, and working from there. Right back in the ancient Israelite world, the three groups that were seen as most vulnerable were the orphan, the widow, and the stranger. And stranger is like a very large kind of category that represents anyone that wasn't officially a part of the like Judean society, right? Um, but obviously, what the message is larger. It's about all people who are living on the edges of society, being oppressed by the mainstream dominant forces, are to be cared for, and you need people within that society calling for it. That was the role of the prophets. So that's what drew me to the rabbinate, was this long, many thousands of years tradition of lifting these people up. The thing that is most difficult about those stories, though, is we now, people all over the world know who Isaiah and Jeremiah and Micah were. Like, these are books that are like on shelves literally all over the world. And in their time, people did not like them. Uh,
They're great names that people now name their kids after.
right. Yeah. I mean, these are people that are seen as heroes. And if you actually read the books, like in their time, like, Jeremiah got thrown in jail, he got thrown in a pit. These guys got their lives challenged. Like, people wanted to kill them for speaking out against power at that time, and now we raise them up. So it's a hard thing to reckon with, but that is what the tradition in the prophets is all about.
And so that in ancient Israel, the ancient Judean tribes advocated for caring for the orphan, the widow, and the stranger. Does the modern state of Israel live up to those decrees?
Yeah, I mean, if you read the Declaration of Independence, right, it calls for building a state in line with these values. Very explicitly talks about the values of the prophets, right? And yet it has never really been that. Even before the Declaration of Independence was signed, Plan Dalet was already written and underway, which was the plan to push as many Palestinians out of the area that they were hoping would become Israel once the state was declared, to try to create a Jewish majority state, right? Like, the immediate moment leading up to the declaration of the state was already with that in mind. And even though the Declaration of Independence says all people within our borders, regardless of race and religion and gender, should have equal rights, I mean, the trick of logic there is like, well, let's decide who gets to be within our borders before we declare this, right? And that has been the kind of trick of logic for so long with regard to the Palestinians, is that obviously there are Palestinian people who are citizens of Israel, and they suffer systemic racism in their own ways. Um, but the Palestinian peoples who are not citizens of Israel, of course, don't get offered those same uh, like governmental or like social modes of inclusivity that the Declaration of Independence, which is, I should also say, the only founding legal document of the state. There's no constitution. The Declaration of Independence is looked at both as a statement of independence and as the source for all law. So by making sure that these people don't have citizenship, these people being Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, they, of course, don't get the rights of those who are spoken of in the Declaration of Independence, and that's done on purpose.
And we're seeing now that it backfires. You're only as safe as your least protected citizen. The fact that people don't have political rights means they resort to violence to try to claim them. That's something that that connection is hardly talked about. That the idea that extending franchise and political rights, it really is that simple as a way to curb violence.
Of course, yeah. I mean, it is, to me, the most obvious way to try to end this many decades ongoing series of like horrors that have occurred since that initial disenfranchisement. It's like, yeah, you enfranchise people, and then they get to exercise their will within the system itself, right? The only issue is that if and this is an issue as from the Israeli state point of view, not my point of view, right? The issue for the state is that if they enfranchise Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, then very quickly the Jewish vote is outnumbered by non-Jews, right? And the fear is that the new influx of people who aren't Jewish will do with their newfound power what Israel has been doing to Palestinians for, over almost 80 years now. It's this, and which is a very constant refrain. That was kind of the way that it was spoken of in America when there were people pushing back on giving equal rights to Black people. It's like, well, if we give them equal rights, but we'll keep them basically from doing what we did to them, to us. And it's the same kind of logic. It's this fear that retribution and revenge is coming because you did something wrong. Um, I think personally that there are all kinds of ways in which everybody could very easily be enfranchised, all Palestinians, all Israelis, and have votes and be able to determine the future of the state in a way that wouldn't lead to like ongoing horrific violence. I think that there are mechanisms, and we've seen that happen in other countries, but that doesn't seem to be particularly popular, right?
Yeah. So we've established that Judaism, it's an ancient religion that goes back thousands of years. And the state of Israel is a political entity that was established in 1948, a political entity with everything that entails: desalination, sewage, garbage pickup. So would you agree Judaism is not synonymous with the actions of the modern state of Israel?
Oh, yeah, of course. Right. I mean, I think but I think it goes farther than that. It's not about it not being synonymous, right? Um, the the early founders of Zionism, like Moses Hess and Max Nordau and Theodore Herzl, were anti-religious. They wanted to get rid of Judaism. They thought that Judaism itself, this ancient tradition that I ostensibly represent as a rabbi, was at fault for the plight of the Jews in Europe at the time. Judaism made you weak, that Judaism made you effete, that it meant that you were like more concerned with studying than you were with being like a masculine man. Right? This was Max Nordau's whole thing, was that it was that, like, I mean, this guy was Jewish. the stuff he said is like wildly anti-Semitic, but he believed that Judaism made Jews degenerate, and what needed to happen was a Jewish nationalist movement that would be modeled after the other nationalist movements that were rising up in the 19th century that were all about masculinism and patriarchy and like having like this like muscular strength about you that you could fight. And that was the idea behind Zionism from the get-go, was actually getting rid of Judaism. They didn't want that to be a part of what it meant to be Jewish anymore. They wanted it to be a nationality akin to the like newly invented nationalities of German or Italian or Spanish.
Has that separation always been part of your experience, or a better way to phrase this question? Tell me about the American Council for Judaism, that and how it evolved.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, what's so fascinating about this organization is that, um, given the way that I was brought up in the Reform movement and the kind of narrative I learned about Jewish history, it shouldn't have existed. And I didn't know that it existed until I guess it was February of 2024. It was an organization that was founded in 1942 by a group of Reform rabbis and Reform Jews who saw that the Reform movement was moving away from its original anti-Zionist stance. And let me define what that was, because it's a little different than we think of anti-Zionism today, because think it was 1942, right? This was before the state even existed. So their anti-Zionism was one in which they said, no, Jews are not a nation. Jews are not a nationality. We are a religion. And if we start adopting this idea of Jewish nationalism as core to our identities, it's going to cause a problem for us, both in America and in the world. Um, and so they established the ACJ to maintain that original stance of the Reform movement in America and to give Jews all over the country resources to kind of build alongside or outside the institutions that they had otherwise relied on previously to provide them with the ethics and values and Jewish teachings that they needed as Jews. They now needed something outside of it because they disagreed with the way that Zionism was being adopted throughout the Reform.
And what are those ethics and values, if not um, militarism, masculinism, and partying on the beach?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, you know, uh, it's they deeply rooted Reform Judaism, they being the reformers, that really started in the 18th century in Germany and came over to America in the early 19th century. And the Reform movement in America started kind of blossoming in the late 19th century. And they referred to what they were doing as both Reform Judaism and prophetic Judaism. They wanted to live the values of the prophets, this idea that I was talking about before, this idea that it is our responsibility to care for the orphan, the widow, and the stranger. It is our responsibility to create equality. And particularly, there's a document called the Pittsburgh Platform that was adopted in 1885 that was a platform of these values. And the last one, I'm going to butcher it, but the last one basically said, in accordance with Mosaic legislation, it is our responsibility to right the wrongs created in our society by the differences between the wealthy and the poor. Like, it
Wow.
was very explicit about like socioeconomic inequality is what creates problems in society. And like, we are committed to fixing that,
The
which is
prophet
like
Bernie
incredible.
Sanders.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so what, in your capacity as now the executive director of the ACJ, yeah, what are you up to this holiday season? This will be released after Yom Kippur. But tell me about your programming, or what you're looking forward to. And I believe 5786, is that where we
Yes.
are?
That's where we're, yes. Well, yes, that's not where we currently are, but it's where we'll be when this gets released.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, so I will have helped create an Erev Rosh Hashanah service that will have happened in Cobble Hill, Brooklyn, that will be lay led. It'll be led by, like, I'm not leading it. I'm there to help, like, with the back end of it. I'm empowering Jewish people to lead their own ritual and rooted in the values that um, they find to be most important to them in this moment. And so this is going to continue throughout the year with Shabbat. The goal of the ACJ is not just to, combat the reform movement as it is. Like that's also not even a worthwhile goal, right? What is needed right now is an organization to resource the many, many Jews in America who are being disenfranchised from the mainstream Jewish institutions that have stood by and either been completely silent in the face of the genocide against the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, or actively supported it, right? People don't want to go to a place for spiritual nourishment if they feel that they're being asked to check their values and ethics at the door. And so part of the philosophy here is that these individuals need to be given the power to create their own Jewish ritual, their own Jewish community, and live those values that they see echoed within the historic texts and practices of Judaism. And what they need are rabbis to help them, you know, find that within the historical practices and texts, but they don't necessarily need rabbis to do it for them. I think that is perhaps one of the ways that the American Jewish institutional establishment has gone a little bit awry, is that it has, for how long now? Maybe like 150 years now, probably, been really, really hierarchical and created these institutions in which there's um, a guy, and then after the 70s, sometimes a woman at the top
Yeah.
that is kind of like dictating what's happening. And Judaism is done on behalf of the people by this leader. And this isn't true necessarily in Orthodox Judaism. It's like there are like a lot more kind of independent communities because people have are more empowered educationally to do that. Um, but in the reform world, this is it, and really in the conservative world to a great degree as well. Um, and I think that this next phase of Judaism that we're going to be entering into, because anyone who's paying attention knows that there's a schism occurring. How that's actually going to play out on the ground is anyone's guess. But to me, one of the ways to help make sure that we don't um, recreate the problems of the past is to really focus on giving the people the skills and tools they need to build democratic, ethical Jewish institutions enriched by Judaism that speaks to them and that they feel empowered to practice, as opposed to having someone practice kind of on their behalf.
Yeah. How would you frame that schism at risk of being crass? Would you say it's just straight up anti-genocide and genocide apologists?
Um, uh, it's not. I just don't think it's that simple. Like, I think that's more of the loudest symptom of a larger problem that is deeply embedded in the Jewish institutional framework. Since the 1960s, there was this really strong backlash in the American Jewish institutional world against progressivism. There was this moment in the 60s where, like, today we act like all the Jews and all the Jewish institutions were like really in support of civil rights, and really like everybody was marching with Martin Luther King, right?
Yeah.
That Abraham Joshua Heschel, who's a famous rabbi who did in fact march with Martin Luther King, that represents the majority of American Jews. Quite to the contrary, like that wasn't actually accurate of the time. And in fact, Abraham Joshua Heschel at the time, not unlike the prophets of the Bible, was not super well loved by the masses of Jews, because Jews at that time were having a whole lot of racial insecurity, let's put it. Jews had at this time recently felt like they had attained in the um, kind of normalcy in the racial hierarchy of America. And obviously, I'm talking about white Jews. There have always been Jews of color in this country, and there'll continue to be. But as is still true in the Jewish institutional world, the vast majority still today of people leading these organizations are white people. And back then, it was everyone, right? Um, but there was this backlash against that historic Jewish progressive stance that that was coming from the top of institutions, and it aligned really strongly with monetary systems, like economic systems in America, and the alignment of mainstream Jewish institutional life, eventually with the Nixon administration. And the way that that overlapped also with pro-Israel politics, not just in the American Jewish world, but in the American world writ large, kind of creates this illusion that it was all about Zionism, that it was all about Israel. But in fact, it was much more about a total change happening in the way that the um, wider American economic, social, and governmental systems were shifting in the 60s, and the Jewish space within those. And we have been kind of living that out for 60 years now. And we're seeing, like, as so many aspects of American civil society and government and economics are starting to, like, shake and perhaps crumble, that's also being reflected in the American Jewish world. Some of it, I think, is intergenerational. Um, a lot of it's intergenerational, but most of it, I think, actually has to do with class and economics, which itself is also obviously intergenerational. And that this schism is not is being located around Zionism and around this, like, conflict between covering over or being silent about genocide and being loudly against genocide, um, where underneath it's so much more.
That's interesting. Yeah, just the tip of the iceberg. You mentioned Abraham Joshua Heschel, and I do want to talk about him because there are many Jewish institutions and day schools named after him, which ironically he would have been suspended from for he protested against the Vietnam War and said to speak about God and remain silent on Vietnam is blasphemous. Famously said, marching is praying with your feet. So I want to hear about your experiences getting arrested. It was fun. I saw Rabbi Abby Stein at the Jews for Zion canvas, and I said, "Oh yeah, I'm having Rabbi Andrue Kahn on," and she said, "Oh yeah, we've gotten arrested together." So you have you have street cred, literal street cred. So tell me about those experiences.
So there have been a few times where I have done civil disobedience actions that could have led to arrest. Only one where it did. The first one was in November of 2023 when JVP did an action on the Manhattan Bridge, and we shut down the Manhattan Bridge, and it was supposed to be that we would hold the bridge until we were forced to not, right? But the reality is, so many people showed up. There were so many people on the bridge that the NYPD couldn't actually arrest us. There was just too many people.
Wow.
And so we ended up sitting there for a very long time in the rain, and eventually decided that we had accomplished our goal, that the statement that we needed a ceasefire, then, this was November of 2023, um, uh, was clear, and we ended up leaving. Then about 6 months later, I went with rabbis for ceasefire to Israel Palestine, and we did an action at the Gaza border. This was April of 2024, where we were carrying food in the middle of Passover to Gaza. So we drove with a bunch of food up to the Erez crossing, about a kilometer from there, and then started walking. Abby was there too. Um,
And I'll
and mhm,
interrupt. Yeah, Passover famously, if you're listening and you're not familiar, we quite literally say at the Seder, yeah, all those who are hungry come and eat. Though, yeah, those who don't have food come enjoy the Passover offering. So Judaism is fundamentally anti-starvation.
correct. Correct. It is also very clear within the texts historically that even if someone is your enemy, you are supposed to give them food if they need it. Like it is not that like this is like I think there's there's an idea out there that Judaism itself is extremely concerned only with other Jews, right? And that's just not the case. If you actually like delve into the ancient sources of Judaism, both in the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, and then also in the Mishnah, the Talmud, which are really the actual texts that guide Judaism, we have responsibilities that are required of us for all human beings and non-human beings, like animals. It is
Tu
deep
B'Shvat, we have a holiday about trees.
talking about war, even in the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible. It says that if you are besieging a city, you cannot destroy the fruit trees.
Wow.
Like there is a deeply important law in Judaism called Baal Tashchit, which means you're not allowed to just wantonly destroy stuff. Like you are commanded to not just destroy things for destruction's sake. And one of the main things that they talk about in the Tanakh that gets kind of looped into this category in later rabbinic Judaism are trees and particularly fruit trees. Like you're not allowed to cut them down. Um, so I think that's a really good example that like Judaism sees life writ large, not just human life, even though human life is particularly special in Judaism, but life writ large is sacred. And we are supposed to be very careful about what we do with life.
Yeah, we see these videos of olive groves being bulldozed in the West Bank, and yeah, this is too in the weeds, no pun intended, but like the pennies in the pushka for the JNF, I hope that's not what they're funding. Like the
Right.
irony of trees being a symbol of building the state of Israel, and then they're just going ahead and bulldozing people's sources of shade, shelter, income. I'm
Yeah. The biggest irony of it is that the trees that JNF planted were not indigenous to the region,
right.
right?
Hence, I did read somewhere that that's why there's like wildfire issues, eh? Like there's quite literally ecological poor ecological planning.
Yeah. Right.
I got us off track, and classic Tu B'Shvat diversion. But so when you were at the Erez crossing, what was it like? What did you see? Who did you meet?
Yeah. So it was oh, I can't even remember the number, so I'm not even gonna try. But there was a lot of us, a bunch of rabbis for ceasefire, some American, some Israeli, and some non-rabbis joined us as well. And we were eventually stopped by Israeli police, but these Israeli police, not so different from American police at this point, were carrying, like large automatic rifles. Um, and they would push us back and push us back, and then we would try to walk forward, and they would put. It was just that classic protest game. And then eventually, what happened, which was kind of bizarre, was that they arrested uh, the women among us. Um, mhm. And yeah,
How
uh,
could they even bother? How can they even try to explain that? They just took a few of you and let the rest of you go?
well, it wasn't just that they let us go. So this was this is where things got a little scary, I'll say, which was that so there were men left, and we were continuing to do the action, and eventually whoever the head officer, or I don't know what the right language would be for it, said to us, if so we will not arrest you no matter what you do. But what we will do is take you each separately in our cars, drive you somewhere random, and leave you there.
What?
Yeah. And right. And obviously, like, we didn't have our phones on us. We didn't have any money on us because you don't hold those things with you when you are doing an action like that. Um, and so we decided not to risk that because we didn't know what that really meant, like where they
Wait,
would leave us. Um,
is that
and so,
is that kidnapping? I've never heard of that as a law enforcement tactic. Just
yeah, I mean, I
pr-
don't know. The Israeli activists we were with said that that is a fairly common tactic, and that particularly if they are arresting Palestinians and doing that, it's super super dangerous. Um, but that yeah, that they do that fairly regularly.
that's wild. Yeah, I'd love to hear about your experiences. Did you study in Israel? Was it always like a built-in part of Jewish education? It was for me, so I'm wondering your journey to learning the whole history and not just the history that serves us.
Yeah. Um, Oh, can I do the one last action I did
Oh
before
my
we get
gosh,
into that?
please. Yeah.
Sure. So the most recent action I did was with Jews for Food Aid to Gaza, which and there was a number of rabbis from like across the denominations that went to John Thune's office to demand food aid to Gaza from Senator John Thune, um,
In
and
DC?
in DC. Yeah, yeah, we went to DC and we went to his office, and it was right around Tisha B'av. So we spent some time first. Like we had a whole plan of singing Psalm 24, the psalm, or is it 24 or 23? I can't remember. The traditional funerary psalm, the God is my shepherd, I shall not want psalm that is well shared between Jews and Christians. But we were singing it in Hebrew, and then we were going to go through and make some statements while um, one of the rabbis chanted from the Book of Lamentations, which is the book traditionally chanted on Tisha B'Av, which is the holiday that commemorates the destruction of Jerusalem first in 586 BC and then in 70 CE. The language there in that book is so resonant of what is currently happening in Gaza that it is on Tisha B'Av was particularly striking to read it this year. But we didn't even get all the way through the psalm, and they arrested us. Uh, and it was a long day. I'll put it that way. They arrested us, and then they went to get all of our fingerprints, which is not in the past. That is not normally. There's not normally that much processing happening for folks to get arrested for protesting in DC. But as probably everybody knows at this point, things have changed around DC policing over the past month or two. Um, and so they were going to fingerprint and process all of us. But then as soon as they started processing us, the fingerprinting machine went down and the
Wow.
whole fingerprinting system went down. And so they had to process us old school style with ink. And then like some of the police would take like batches of them like by hand to the place where they checked to make sure that none of us were already felons. And then they'd come back and release us slowly in batches. So it took a very long time. But that was the most recent action I participated in, um, and it was really powerful to be there with so many rabbis from various denominations, and for it to be done in such a like again it felt rooted in that idea of prophetic Judaism that is the foundation I think of American Judaism writ large, and um, I didn't grow up with that necessarily as the full foundation of my Judaism.
So yes, what was your Jewish story, Jewish childhood?
Yeah. So I grew up in Tacoma, Washington, which is a city. It's a legit city, and many people from Tacoma will tell you that it is older than Seattle and was the original primary city of Washington state until, for whatever reason, when they were building the train routes, the trains went to Seattle first instead of Tacoma. Um,
And then Fraser was then,
and
yeah,
then Fraser was the like final nail in the coffin for
yeah.
Tacoma. But yeah, I mean, it was a small synagogue. Before I was there, like I think, I was born in 1984. I think in the like mid early 80s, the synagogue that I grew up at had been two synagogues, one conservative, one reform, and they joined together, which happened a lot in the 80s in America. And so it was like kind of a mixture of reform and conservative Judaism. It was very, very like it. I don't know that the word Zionism was ever really spoken.
There wasn't an Israeli flag on the bima, or you didn't?
Well, actually, I don't remember. I actively don't
Interesting.
remember. But it's not that it wasn't an extremely Zionist synagogue. It was an extremely Zionist synagogue. There was a total overlap in how I was brought up between Judaism and Jewish nationalism, and the idea that, like, I really remember it being inculcated deeply in me that, like, the best way to be a Jew in the world would be to make Aliyah, to move to Israel and join the IDF, and like that was the like most ideal way of enacting my Judaism according to that synagogue and how I was brought up. And that like the next better way would be to like be a little bit more orthopractic, right? Like practice like Orthodox Jews a little bit better. And then the next better way is just like being a member of a synagogue and going for the holidays, right? Like but that was without question how I was raised. It was a very, very like I think that so there may not have been a flag of Israel on the Bima, but when we had Hebrew school on Thursday afternoons, before we started our Hebrew studies, we would stand and put our hands over our heart and sing Hatikva. And like I didn't know what it meant, right? It's in Hebrew, but I still know all the words to Hatikva because I did it every week as part of my Jewish studies, which in retrospect is like appalling, right? Like,
Not to brag, but I did it every other day.
oh,
It would be in high school. It was the Barbara Streisand Hatikva alternated with the Celine Dion "O Canada." So now I'm like, I appreciate the commitment to divas,
yeah,
but you were singing the national anthem of a country you didn't live in, vote in.
correct. Yeah, as like a core like constituent part of what I was being taught was being Jewish, right? And then in high school, I went on a trip, like, and this was because, like, the synagogue was the conduit for all of this stuff. That was 2.5 months in Israel on a campus where we spent most of our time learning what was called Jewish history. Retrospect, it was like kind of Jewish history, but it's like revisionist Jewish history, right? Zionist history being taught at
Revisionist Zionist history.
like literally revisionist Zionist history, correct? That and we had like tutors for the other topics we were supposed to be taking in our high schools back home, but the vast majority of our time was us like learning and memorizing these historical kind of like trajectories, all of which led to the ultimate realization of Jewish history in the founding of the state of Israel, right? Um, and I came back from that like deep in it, like that was my whole identity.
That's wild. 2.5 months. Was it during the school year or a summer
Hmm.
program?
No, during
Wow.
the school year.
So that's fun. That's to like as a kid, like, oh, you get half a semester off. Like
It,
that's
it It was, but it was also like it's very brilliant, right? Because at
it's
that age,
genius.
that's when you are forming your sense of self. Like having 2.5 months away from your family, away from everything away from like in a totally alien country and culture, and being told like, no, this is actually who you are. These are the stories that are most important to like forming what it means to be you in the world. And like, you should carry this with you for the rest of your life as your core identity. Like, when better to do that? I mean, I think that's probably why, conscription happens at 18. And why it also used to happen at that age in America, right? Is like, your brain, we know our brains don't finish developing until we're 25. And so your brain is still like seeking to understand what it means to belong to society and be a person in the world. And so that was what I was given. Um, and it was an incredibly powerful experience, right? It did change my sense of self, my level of confidence, all of this stuff in what I still think like I don't think it was good that I did it, but it led to some positive developments in my own sense of like self and my own sense of self-confidence. But that was all rooted in like, in kind of like fascist nationalistic self-understanding. That, I went to college and was exposed to other people,
That's
and
so dangerous. That's what
it's
they
very
warn you
dangerous.
against.
Yes, don't do that. You have to go to a
Yeah.
college where you only hang out with other Jews at the Hillel. But no, I went to a college that, and my one of the big turning points for me was my professor. In my she taught a class called Modern Prophecy, and it was the idea of people like Abraham Joshua Heschel being prophets, that there are prophets today, and that prophecy isn't necessarily about like being able to tell the future and do miracles, but it's about having this position with regard to society of of pointing out where things are wrong, even when it's unpopular, and like kind of not shutting up about it, right?
So you took that class. Did you know you wanted to be a rabbi? Or you were
No,
just,
absolutely not. I I fought it tooth and nail for a very long time. But in this class, she assigned me a paper on a guy who was a Reform rabbi named Judah Magnus, who was one of the founders of Hebrew University. He was obviously an ardent Zionist, um, but when he was active in the 1930s, he was one of the leaders of an organization called Brit Shalom, which also included Martin Buber, a very famous Jewish philosopher, Hannah Arendt, obviously a very famous philosopher, um, Albert Einstein, everybody knows who that guy was. And their goal was for it to be a binational state from the beginning, that it wouldn't be a like only Jewish state where Jews had special privileges, but that it would be a binational Jewish Palestinian state where everybody had equal rights and both peoples were fully enfranchised. And that was very unpopular. And all of these people who, again, you look from now and everybody's like, wow, like Hannah Arendt was like so brilliant in her time and pointing out these like fallacies and the way in which like our society is actually playing into ongoing fascism. And then Martin Buber like is upheld as this incredibly like deep thinker about the relationships between people and how that's the most important part of Judaism. You know, I mean, Einstein's known for physics, which is a little bit different, but Judah Magnus was known for, being a Reform rabbi and being a Zionist when that was very unpopular. But his Zionism was one that was about equal rights for all people. And he lived out the rest of his life basically completely alienated from Israel, from the establishment, from the powers that be, because he never gave up on that dream. Um, and so that was like what modern prophets meant, according to my professor. And it opened my eyes to like, wow, what actually occurred isn't what had to have occurred. Like the idea that a Jewish state is required to be like um a like monolithic ethno state in which only Jews have enfranchisement. Like there were people at the beginning saying like absolutely not. We need equal rights for all people. And they were disenfranchised for doing that.
wow.
And so that was the very beginning. And then I spent a year studying in Israel, my junior year of college, one semester in Beersheba and one semester in Jerusalem. And the semester in Beersheba in particular was very impactful. It was 2004, the summer of 2004. It was still during the Second Intifada. There were there were bombings occurring like near me. With like not with regularity in Beersheba, but there was one like really large, horrific double bus bombing by Hamas while I was there. That was like very close to my dorm, and like I had friends that were like right by it as it happened, and like literally saw it happen. Um uh and I was being exposed to the reality of Israeli society. Like often when you go, like when I went in high school, I was mostly just with other American Jews, and like you like kind of meet Israelis now and then, and like in very controlled environments. And even on the Hebrew University campus in Jerusalem, it was kind of like that too. Like there were just so many, um, and not just Americans, but non-Israelis studying in like one area where we were all living together and kind of socializing only with each other. But in Beersheba, that wasn't the case. There were like 10 Americans, and then everyone was Israeli. Um, and I saw that this idea that I was taught that um, Israeli and American Jews have a very strong bond, and that like Israelis are going to welcome you and want you to be a part of their society and be friends with you because we are all like one people, and like we're all like family. And that was not my experience at all. They had no interest in being friends with me or us, and like my roommates were actually very mean to me, and it was jarring. And then I took a class with this amazing professor, Abu Rabia. He was a Bedouin man who got a PhD, I believe, at Ben Gurion University, and was teaching about the Bedouins of Israel and Palestine. And I had never heard of them other than I think probably doing like one of those like tourist Bedouin tent things when I was there in high school, but heard all about like what the state had done to the Bedouin population, which was very, very similar to what America and Canada did to their native populations. Um, and I was from the Northwest, and we had like classes in public school in the Northwest about the history of the Pacific Northwest and the native populations there and like what happened and all of that. So I like saw the parallels. I was like, wait, this is not what I learned either,
Hmm.
right? And so like these things started kind of coming apart. And then the biggest kind of blow to what I grew up with regard to the relationship with Zionism and Judaism in my education came when I was traveling with a friend in Jordan. And first, we came across two people who had just been kicked out of Israel for doing, I think, I wouldn't have known this language then, protective presence work in the West Bank. They were a couple of young Americans that like told me about what they were doing, and I had never heard of any of this. I didn't know like what that meant, and I like learned from them like, whoa, this is like really bad what's happening in the West Bank,
For
right?
people, if people don't know, what is protective presence?
Oh, protective presence is right now if you are Jewish and you're interested in participating in protective presence work, the best place to do it is the Center for Jewish Nonviolence, and it's about going to a place where um, the state, in one way or another, either through the military or through the settlements, is consistently right now working to um, uh, either destroy or take over Palestinian land and homes in the West Bank. And by physically being there and standing kind of in between the settlers or the IDF, uh, people who are not Israeli or Palestinian, like Americans, create a problem for them, right? Like this is becoming less and less true. They're starting to care less and less about who you are, and they'll just like beat the hell out of you if you're in the way. Um, but the idea is that by being present in these places, it is less likely that Palestinian homes will be destroyed by settlers or the IDF, and then the Palestinians will be dispossessed. Um, but yeah, Center for Jewish Nonviolence is currently recruiting for this October. So if you're interested in doing that kind of work, I highly recommend it. But they had been doing that. I'm not sure if they were in the West Bank or Gaza either. At this point, this was right before the settlements were pulled out of Gaza. Um, but then again, I was traveling with a friend. We kind of went parted our ways from these folks. And I took a bus back from Amman to Jerusalem and was sitting next to a Palestinian guy that was going home to the West Bank from his university in Amman, that was my age and spoke perfect English. And like that's how you unlearn this stuff, is you actually like have a individual human being. Again, going back to Martin Buber's famous concept is that like God appears when you're having an I and thou experience, which means you are like engaging with someone or something on such a level that you kind of forget the separation between the two of you, and you are just so connected that you're feeling what they're feeling what you're feeling. Everybody's had these experiences, right? And I was on the bus with this guy for a few hours, and it fully opened my eyes to like, oh wait, like all this stuff I'd been taught about Palestinians and their experiences, and that they like only want Jews gone because they're anti-Semitic or whatever. It's just nonsense. Like these are just people living in their homes, trying to live their lives. And this guy that, my age, um, didn't know for sure that he was even going to be able to get in to his home. Like the border guard may have just forced him to go back to Oman instead of going and visiting his family. Whereas I, just this like American Jew, would have absolutely no problem. And it became very apparent to me that what I had learned was both not the whole picture and probably entirely incorrect. And I could keep going with these stories and stories and stories because it takes a long time. But I think that was one of the primary like points where it really just shattered.
And then at what point did you say, I'm going to become a rabbi?
That's a great question. It's a much simpler story. I So after undergrad, I really fell in love with academic study of religion, and thought I wanted to get a PhD in religious studies. The first thing I did after undergrad was go to Queen's University in Canada.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
yeah,
E-
um,
That's impressive. I've never met anyone from Tacoma who then lived in Kingston, Ontario.
I did. I spent a year in Kingston, Ontario. It was a 12-month intensive master's program in religion and modernity, which, to go back to the previous segment, I ended up focusing my study on the construction of Sabra identity. Sabra identity is the like kind of idea of the like native Israeli living in Palestine and developing their own culture that was different from that of the diaspora. Um, but I wrote a master's project on how that was like constructed around the military and the use of applying religious imagery from historic Jewish texts and stories and practices to the military itself as a way of informing new Israeli identity. Um, and after that experience, which was, Kingston was lovely except for in the winter, and I decided I wanted to take a little bit of time to make sure this is what I wanted to do. I went back to the Northwest for a couple of years and worked in a nightclub and then restaurant and bartender and all that stuff. And then decided to go and get another master's. Thankfully, that first one, because Canada is a lovely country, was entirely free. Um, and went to go get another master's at Jewish Theological Seminary in Manhattan, which is the school where conservative rabbis are ordained, but they also have like incredible academic programs. I did a master's in the Hebrew Bible and ancient Near Eastern language, with the goal of doing a PhD in religious studies focused on the way American literature makes use of biblical motifs. Um, this was a 2-year program. After my first year, I was talking to like my mentors from undergrad and from previous grad school and from current grad school. And they were all like, listen, if like all you want to do in life is get a PhD in religious studies, you cannot imagine any other track in life, do it. And we'll help you do it. And we'll make sure like you get what you need. But the most likely outcome for anyone getting a PhD in something like religious studies at this time is adjuncting for the rest of your life and never having health insurance and never getting paid well. Like these tenured positions that you are seeing us all have are going away. Consider something else just for your own livelihood, if you can. And so I thought, what do I like doing? Why did I want to be a professor? I wanted to read. I wanted to write. I wanted to teach. I wanted to like mentor students. And like, well, ostensibly, that's what rabbis do. Ostensibly. And so I was like, okay, maybe I'll just become a rabbi because that's a better career path. And what I really love is what I've been saying this whole time is making meaning out of these ancient texts and figuring out like what do the prophets have to say to today. what does it mean when the Bible tells us things? Like, how do we actually make that make sense today, considering it's a book from 4,000 years ago or something, right? Uh, and like that is also ostensibly what a rabbi does. And so I decided, rather than stay at JTS, even though it would have been easier, I wanted to go to HUC because the conservative movement didn't really jive with my conception of Judaism. And I spent a couple years working at a place called Central Synagogue in Manhattan as a full-time educator for their kids, and then went to HUC. Um, HUC JIR is the Reform Rabbinical School. It currently has campuses in LA and New York and Jerusalem. Um, and I'll end the story here. But the first year at HUC for everyone it has to take place in Jerusalem. I tried for various reasons to get out of it and couldn't. And I went and everybody had to have an internship that year. And I got placed with a rabbi named Arik Asherman, who is again, if we're talking about modern prophets, he is the closest person I have ever met to a modern prophet. He
Wow.
has spent his entire career in Israel and Palestine working for Palestinian equal rights. And I was helping him organize protective presence trips to the West Bank, where we would bring basically tourists from all over the world into the West Bank in October during the olive harvest to protect and help harvest the olives, so that, as you were saying before, Orly, there's a common practice among settlers to uproot olive trees um, from Palestinian farms. What people may not know about that, like, yes, it's just an act of wanton destruction, but there are these old Turkish laws that are still in effect, that if you have farmland and you don't harvest it for a certain number of years, it becomes as if it is ownerless. And so the goal is to keep, from the settlers' perspective, is to keep the Palestinians from harvesting their land for however long they have to be kept to harvest it for it to become technically ownerless land, and then they take it,
Oh my
right? Like
God.
that, yeah,
The settlers literally collaborating with the Ottoman Empire.
right. Yeah. I mean, and that's the other thing, is that a lot of Israeli law comes from the Ottoman Empire too. But that was the goal, was for us to do protective presence by our being there back in, this was 2013, 2014. The settlers were still doing horrifically violent things, but it wasn't as over the top and with such impunity as it is now, with Ben Gvir in charge of the police and everything. But Arik had already been there for decades doing this work. He's still out there literally every day, even as the settlers have done grievous bodily injury to him multiple times. He's still going out there and still doing the work to fight for Palestinian rights in the West Bank. And yeah, so being placed with him for a year was another one of these moments where like everything changed in my mind, like both because I was, seeing this stuff firsthand and seeing what he was doing, and also realizing like, if this guy's out here doing this, literally putting his life on the line with this kind of regularity, then like the least I can do is say what Israel's doing is wrong.
That's amazing. Yeah, I keep thinking back to the fact that people use the texts that you know so deeply as as excuses or reasons to inflict damage and harm. So would you say that, like, if Jewish supremacists can invoke Judaism as an excuse to kill people, then by the same logic we can invoke Judaism to tell people not to kill people?
Yeah. And I think there's a much clearer argument for that, right? Like the way that Jewish nationalists and Jewish supremacists use the text is actually a very like tortured attempt at making things say things they don't say, right? Like for instance, if you look at the Tanakh, there is a whole bunch of like pretty horrible genocidal stuff coming from God to the Israelites, right? Like in the book of Deuteronomy, God tells the Israelites, go into the land and kick these people out, wipe them out, get rid of them, yada, 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 right? Um, but the reality is, like, A, archaeological evidence shows that that didn't actually happen. um, and B, according to like actual rabbinic logic, that those commandments were about that particular time in that particular place and that those particular groups. If you like kind of drill down into the text, it says that the reason that these people are being dispossessed was because of their behavior in the land, which involved uh, I won't go into what it involved, but really bad stuff they were doing. And God was like, so these people are doing really bad stuff in here, so we're going to punish them for it. Which
These were
is all
Jewish people, Hebrews committing.
these were Israelites that were coming from having been enslaved in Egypt to the land of Canaan, and dispossessing the people there. In the time, that was God was saying this was being done because of what they had done to defile the land, right? And at the same time, when God says that in the book of Leviticus, he says, and if you defile the land, the same will be done to you, right? And then lo and behold, you read the rest of the Tanakh, and that's what happens, right? The Israelites also misbehave, and first the Assyrians come in and take out 10 of the tribes. And then, a couple hundred years later, the Babylonians take the rest out, right? Because God's justice isn't just on behalf of Jews, and I should say Israelites. It is God is the creator of the whole world, right? God is the judge of the whole world, according to our texts. So it's not just about us. It's about the role we play within this much larger ecosystem of humanity and life on this planet. And when you get to like later texts, like the medieval period, one of the most, the not one of, the most famous medieval rabbi is Moshe ben Maimon or Maimonides or Rambam, however you call him. He has this whole chunk in his major work, the Mishnah Torah, called Kings and Wars. And it's about the laws of kings and the laws of wars. And it's all predicated upon there being an anointed king, a Messiah king who can enact these laws. Right. And so there's still all this regulation as to what this king can and can't do with regard to war, but it can still only happen when the Messiahs come. And so the idea that this stuff is somehow applicable to today is ridiculous because there's no Messiah. The Messiah hasn't come. Like, unless, since we've been on this call, the Messiah has come and I just missed it because all of my notifications are off.
So,
Like, the Messiah hasn't come. So the stuff isn't applicable.
I'd like to think that the Messiah and their glory can override Do Not Disturb.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I think you're
As
right.
one
I
of the
think that I'd get
powers.
one of those
Yeah.
major alerts on my phone.
Yeah. So would you say that right now is yet another period in the grand scheme of Jewish history where the Israelites are misbehaving, that there's precedent?
Oh, of course. Like, I mean, but that's the whole point of Judaism, is that like it got really rewired by Zionism becoming a kind of hegemonic force, not just in the Jewish world, but in the world writ large, right? But the whole point of Judaism is that, in fact, we are always those Israelites that were ejected from the land. We are never actually doing everything right. We can't. And so we are constantly doing tshuva. We are constantly doing the work of returning to what our ancient wisdom tradition tells us is the right way to be in the world and trying to do better every minute of every day. That's the point of Judaism and has always been the point of Judaism. And if you think about it, right, like that puts you in the position of always trying to make sure you're not harming other people, always trying to make sure that you are behaving with justice and good judgment in like all aspects of your life. And that was the relationship to the world that the early Zionists thought was a weak one. That was the one that they wanted to kind of remove from the Jews of Europe and replace with Jewish nationalism. And one thing that I think is really important to think of, and a really good sign of this, is the story of the Maccabees, right? I'm sure you grew up with the entire story of the Maccabees being told during Hanukkah, right? This idea that there was this like ragtag force of guys that were going to like overthrow the Greek Empire who had oppressed them for being Jews in ancient Palestine, right?
Yeah, we wouldn't talk about it. We would sing about it that like I'd like to be a Maccabee so big and brave and bold.
Exactly. So big and
Yeah.
brave and bold, right? Like it's this militaristic approach.
I
But one
think it
thing,
even goes oh, sorry, but now it's coming up from
do
the
it, yeah,
recesses of
do
my
it, the
head.
whole thing.
I think it goes like, I'd like to fight with all my might, but I am only 4 years old. It's like the only thing preventing you from fighting is that we're still in kindergarten.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So if you actually look at the Jewish canon, like the core textual corpus of Judaism, the books of the Maccabees aren't in it. They were left out on purpose. The reason we have the books of the Maccabees is because they're in the Catholic Apocrypha.
Wow.
Um, if you look to try to find the story of the Maccabees, there's a very, very late tradition that was used in only a small number of Jewish communities around the world of reading what was called Megillat Ahasuerus on Hanukkah, which is kind of like a mashup of the story of the Maccabees. But if you read in the Talmud, what we're celebrating, this is also a story, is that they say very like vaguely, oh, the Hasmoneans overthrew the Greeks. But then what the actual miracle was that they needed to reconsecrate the temple, and they found only enough oil to light the lamps for one day when they needed 8 days to reconsecrate it. But that one tiny amount of oil lasted 8 days. And that's the miracle that we're celebrating on Hanukkah, right? According to the actual like Jewish traditions. But Zionism readopted the story of the Maccabees as the core story of what it meant to be Jewish because A, it's a militaristic story. B, if you look at, there are like four different books of the Maccabees that tell the story in four different ways. And one of them doesn't mention God at all. It's really literally just like a tale of a militarized um, guerrilla insurgency of religious extremists, which they were because they didn't just attack the Greeks. They also very violently attacked other Judeans who had adopted any Greek practices. Um, and they retook Jerusalem and established the Hasmonean kingdom, which, when you hear people talk about the reestablishment of the Jewish state, what they're referring to is what the Hasmonean kingdom was in their mind. That there was a Jewish independent state for about 160 years, according to this historiography, by the Hasmonean family. The rabbis did not like the Hasmoneans for various reasons. And the other reality about the story is that like one or two generations in, the Hasmoneans became basically a like puppet government for the empires of the time anyway. It wasn't actually like a ancient independent Jewish state. It was like it was it's the same way that empires work today, where you have like vassal states all over the world. Um, but as we were talking about, the revisionist Zionist history turned that into the core, like a core moment of Jewish history that needed to be reenacted in 1948. And so the adoption of parts of Jewish historical tradition that had actually been kind of rejected by Judaism was a core constituent piece of this new revisionist Zionist approach to what it meant to be Jewish in the 19th century.
So would you say it's it being what it means to be Jewish, what the dominant form of Jewish practice is, it's changed before, which means it can change again?
100%. I mean, it is the entire history of Judaism is a history of change. The Judaism we practice today, which is rabbinic Judaism, only came about because the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed and we could no longer sacrifice animals to God. Um, and one thing that I think gets left out of that narrative quite often is that the rabbis who established the Judaism we practice today, started establishing it well before the temple was actually destroyed. They had seen that the hierarchical nature of how the temple was working with the empires of the time and the king, who was like a vassal of the empires of the time, were corrupt. And they didn't trust him and said, well, what we need to be doing, again, is putting the tools of Judaism in the hands of for back then, the Judean people. Like, we need to figure out what it means to integrate these values, these lessons, and these rituals into our daily lives, because we can't actually trust this leadership who has shown itself to not be up to the ethical challenges of the time to enforce and teach these ethics properly. And so that started well before the destruction of the temple. But once the temple was destroyed, they were in the best position to be like, well, this is what we do next, right? They'd already been developing it. And I think it's important to know or to remember that in this time where there's so much tumult in the Jewish world, there have been rabbis and other leaders out there already prefiguring what Judaism is going to be after this phase of it is over. And it's clear that we are in this very strong moment of change.
And so, what does it look like? What does a meaningful, ethical Jewish life look like going forward?
I mean, I think, and this is what we're trying to do with our own community that is kind of a tester community in Brooklyn that we want to figure out how to spread throughout the country, is give the power of religious ritual, of communal organizing, of democratic governance to the individuals who want to build their own communities. Give them the infrastructure and the tools to build it, and they will build it. And so it's much more about creating grassroots communities of people in their particular locations, deeply embedded in their communities, not just amongst Jews, but amongst everyone, and bringing to bear the Jewish traditions that are important to them and make sense for them where they are. And because I believe Judaism is a tradition of liberation and of ethics, that every place this happens, these communities will benefit not only the Jews there, but everyone around them, because that's written into the code of what it means to be Jewish. You're supposed to help the entire community around you thrive. Then going back to the orphan, the widow, and the stranger, we are responsible for everything around us. And so the goal is to bring us back to caring about where we are and the communities we are within as our primary issue, as opposed to focusing on a state thousands of miles away that we have chosen not to be a part of.
I'm grateful for leaders like you. I try to sometimes to end on somewhat of a hopeful note. So what gives you hope? This has been a hopeful conversation. The fact that there are leaders like you doing the work, and the fact that people say, yeah, the people will tell. It's been in my comment section, at least, it's been a debate of who gets to claim Judaism, who gets to be Jewish. I get told that I'm no longer Jewish, even though right behind me is literally my grandma's record. It says Fiddler on the Roof, a new musical. It doesn't get any more Jewish than that. So I'm grateful that, yeah, there are people who know their shit, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
What gives you hope?
What gives me hope is the fact that, like, what I'm trying to do isn't building from scratch. People are doing this all over the country and all over the world already. I offered one kind of like, I'll call it an alpha test class on how to build your own Jewish community. And I had someone from Minnesota, someone from Boston, someone from Arizona, someone from Queens, and someone from Cape Town, all
Wow.
wanting to get support in building a local Jewish community rooted in Jewish practice and liberationist values, and wanting to devote their spare time to doing it, like as a volunteer. So what gives me hope is the fact that it's already happening, and I'm just trying to help it happen more cogently and with greater support. Um, One thing I do really want to offer, based on what you just said about your comment section, and like the internet is a hellscape. So like obviously, like we should take anything in the comment section with like many grains of salt. But the mere concept that there is one Judaism and a single Jewish people is itself Narishkeit. It's nonsense. There have always been many, many different Judaisms all happening at once all over the world, often seen as mutually exclusive, right? There have been many different Jewish people and different Jewish groups of people. Early on in America, everybody knows that Ashkenazim and Sephardim are like a little bit different and like used to not marry each other. German and Polish Jews wouldn't even marry each other. They wouldn't even belong to each other's synagogues, right? Like it has always been an incredibly multivocal, incredibly diverse tradition. And it's hard to even call it a singular tradition. The thing that binds it all together is this very abstract idea of Torah, that there is an ethical wisdom inheritance that is both contained in the writing of the Tanakh, of the Hebrew Bible, and the writing of the Talmud, but that is also passed down verbally from generation to generation. And just like any good game of telephone, wherever you are living, that verbal transmission is going to be different, right? And so this idea that anyone can adjudicate who is and who isn't Jewish, or that like there are certain markers that every Jew has, and like it just isn't real and isn't true and is a product of, Jewish fascism. This idea that like, oh, only this very like refined thing is a true Jew and everybody else is fake. And then it just so happens that this very refined thing is someone who is a Jewish supremacist. Like it's how all forms of nationalism and fascism work. Ours isn't special, but it's on us to continue rejecting it, which you have been doing an incredibly good job of. So I will
Thank
also
you
say
so
that you
much.
give me hope, Orly. The fact that you're
Or
out here doing this and like, laughing off all of these like heinous insults and I'm sure threats you get, and knowing that what you're doing is right, like you are a perfect example of what I'm talking about. It's already happening. We just need more people with the kind of knowledge I have, and there are tons of them in Rabbis for Ceasefire, supporting folks like you and building the communities you want to see.
thank you so much. Now my Matlow tear ducts are kicking in the whole time. I'm so excited for my grandpa to hear this. My 98-year-old's grandpa. Hi, grandpa, because he spends his days agonizing about the future of the Jewish people, and then passed it on to me. And I have one last semi-funny question before we get into plugs, because I want to make sure people can find you and join the community. Do you have any takes on the Hot Rabbi show on Nobody Wants This on Netflix? Because full disclosure, I couldn't bring myself to watch it because I read about its depiction of Jewish women being like the ultimate obstacles to happiness. And I'm like, I hate myself enough. I don't need this.
So I watched maybe 3 episodes of it and then couldn't watch any more of it. Like one of the most absurd things about it is that like there's this idea that Kristen Bell walking into a synagogue would immediately be clocked as not Jewish. And that's ridiculous. If you go into any of the synagogues on the Upper East Side in Manhattan, you will see so many women that look like Kristen Bell at various ages that like no one's going to assume isn't Jewish. It's ridiculous. Like so much was so problematic about that show. And like the one thing that I think might be a little, if I want to find like a little cherry that isn't garbage on top of that show, it is that it showed the this like really gnarly undercurrent of anti-convert that exists throughout the Jewish world that does like for real need to be addressed. Like it is based in like weird, awful eugenicist ideas of Judaism. And like that is shown as bad in the show, which is nice. But I agree with you as well. The like depiction of Jewish women is also like awful. The depiction of Jewish men isn't any better. Like it's not good for the Jews. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, yeah, we need better shows. So I know your wife as a comic. There are Jewish women with a body of work that aren't inherently offensive.
Yes, agreed. And apparently I haven't seen this show yet. But long story short, which is also on Netflix, is supposed to be very good.
Such a huge relief because I love BoJack Horseman. It's Raphael Bob Waksberg. So there are alternatives to the not so hot rabbi show.
Yes.
And now, where can people find you?
Great. Yeah.
If you have anything you want to plug.
Our website is acjna.org, the American Council for Judaism. We are probably most active on Instagram, which is just American Council for Judaism on Instagram. And I think that's mostly it. I'm Rabbi Andy Kahn on Instagram as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I truly can't thank you enough. And I'm sure my grandpa, my grandpa will get in touch as well.
I
And
want to hear what he thinks afterwards for sure.
oh, he will. He'll let you know. The best.
Good.
He heckled the rabbi's sermon last year at Rosh Hashanah, which was like, that's my moth story. And when you're 98, you can heckle at full volume and get away with it. So that's why I'm eating well and exercising, because I want to make sure I get to be 98 and I can heckle the rabbi.
Yes, yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening and or watching War is Stupid, an anti-war podcast about war. Please subscribe, rate and review, tell your dads. We'll see you next time.